Morning. Nice to have you guys here at my talk. I'm Derek Ross. I work at Sauce Labs. I'm a solutions engineer. And today I want to be talking about continuous testing in a DevOps world, specifically visual testing your web components using Sauce Labs. Any UI developers in the room? Anybody experienced with Selenium or Appium test? There's a lot more hands. Cool. So we're going to talk about a little bit about shifting that testing. So about me, I come from a background of the military. I was a special forces. And then when I got out, I became a Scrum Master and a DevOps engineer. Spent a lot of time building teams and making DevOps teams in a special forces team fashion. I've done a lot of release engineering and doing SDLC optimization and deployment automation. And if you'd like to talk to me about any of these things or about Sauce Labs or experiences, please reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn, and I'd love to make contact with you. So Sauce Labs, if you haven't heard of Sauce Labs, we're a continuous testing platform. And recently, we acquired a company called Screener. We announced that, I think, about last month. And Screener is a visual testing tool. And so now that tool is called Sauce Visual Component Testing. And we're baking it into our product. So why, as a Selenium and Appium supporter, we do XUI and Espresso as well, why are we getting into visual? So Frontend Code, we are a front-end code testing company. And more code and complexity is moving to the front end. So it's something that you really have to think about testing. It's something that gets forgotten a lot because of how expensive it is to invest the time into writing Selenium and Appium test. And you have to ask yourself, are you effectively testing all this front-end code before I push it? There's a lot of major shifts in application development, and component-driven development is one big one. I've worked on a team where we built single components that could be used across an entire organization, single nav bars, single buttons, single sidebars. And so the way we design systems has changed. So why component-driven development? UI isolation for focused development and testing. That allows us to write a small part, have one team build these components, and provide them for an entire organization. Those libraries can be shared and reused, which is going to save you time and development effort. And then enables you to test and shift left and earlier in the pipeline to get that early feedback for a faster development process. So teams want to move fast without breaking their UI, and in order to do that, automated testing is essential. If you're doing manual testing, it's always happening late in the release process. You have to get a lot of manual testers in the same room. You have to get a lot of code delivered to a release branch or a build before that can happen. And so automating UI tests is time-consuming. Writing and maintaining Selenium tests can be very time-consuming. It creates a lot more code to maintain. For every bit of code that you write for the UI, you need to write a test, and now you have to maintain both those code bases. And the test code definitely grows as the project grows. And with Selenium, you can't necessarily test something that a human can test by looking at it and visualizing the product and seeing what's changed. So we need to test both the functional and visual aspects of the UI, and that requires a lot of team buy-in. So if you want a component test, what if there was no need to create tests or write assertions? No need to maintain test code as your UI changed? What if you could generate tests for every single UI state that you had? And what if you could get visual and functional test coverage in a natural workflow out of a single tool? And that's where Screener and Storybook come into play. So has anybody used Storybook or heard of Storybook? Awesome. You guys are going to be in for a nice treat when I show you this here in a second. So Storybook is a place to develop your components. And then you can automatically get UI tests without actually writing those tests using Screener and Storybook together. So that's going to let us test every component automatically. We're going to catch visual and functional regressions in one tool. And then we're going to be able to test UI across multiple browsers and resolutions. And then we can also integrate this into the team branching workflow, which is critical to having an event-driven pipeline. So let's get out of slides and let's look at some product. So here in my package.json, I'm going to use JavaScript. I have this Storybook script, so I'm going to do npm run Storybook. That's going to start Storybook, and I'm going to be able to access that on my local host from my browser. And so we can see here I have the screener UI. In Storybook, I can develop all these components. I can see every single component. I can see different states of that component. So if I have a loading state, or if I have a signed-in state, all the different states for a component can be housed here in Storybook. And it's a great development tool. I'm not going to talk too much about Storybook, but I did want you to see what it is so you can know why we're using it and what's going on there. What's powerful about developing in Storybook and using Screener is that we can actually kick off our master job, which I ran here, and that's going to run my pipeline file. And in my pipeline file, I'm checking out code. And then in my sauce visual step, I'm using Node.js to run npm install and npm run test Storybook. And what that does is that populates the initial baseline in master. So that ran this job. I can see each component that was tested. And then when I go to review these components, I've got all of those different components that you just saw in Storybook automatically uploaded into the UI. So I have the baseline for all of those components that we just looked at. So now I'm going to accept all of these. And now I have a successful baseline. So there's my baseline of all of my visual screenshots of my code. So now let's get into a workflow. All right, so I just created a feature branch. And now I'm going to go in and make a UI change. So I have this API screen, API key screen. And I'm going to shift a button from the right side to the left side. So we're going to push that up. Since we're using a multi-branch job with a pipeline file, since I created a feature branch, I'm going to push this up to GitHub. GitHub, using a webhook, is going to send that webhook to Jenkins. In Jenkins, I can go to the base of this job. And I can see that it picked up my feature Jenkins World demo branch that I just pushed up, so it automatically is going to define this job. It's going to check out code into the job, and it's going to run my sauce visual test. So let's take a look at the screener config.js file. In my screener config.js, I can see that I set a project repo name, so I call that Derek Screener Demo. I'm telling it where my Storybook configuration directory is, and I'm setting it to the public directory. I'm giving it my screener API key, so I can point it up there, and I'm also giving it my resolution. And I'm setting my base branch as master. So now that I have set a feature branch, that baseline branch is actually going to pull my baseline for my visual screenshots so that I can compare the next screenshots. And then I'm setting the branch name so that it knows which branch I'm doing this for. So we can see here, it's kicked off that job. And now it's running across 8 different VMs of parallelism of Chrome, and it's checking all of those different components. I can go into the branches, and I can see the different branches that this code is working on, so it fits into my team's branching workflow. We can see here it's grabbing all of our different component files and pushing those up. And then it provides us a link right in the job that our devs can use to go right to the build. That'll finish up first in a second, and while it's doing that, I'm going to go ahead and open a pull request for this as well. We can see what the change was made, and then we're going to create that pull request. That pull request is actually going to get picked up, so it's going to send another webhook, and we can pick that up in the pull request. And somebody might say, hey, that's a little redundant. You just built it in feature, and you built it in pull request. I wanted to demo to you that it actually is, pull request is a separate branch in this file. You can set that to be excluded. So if you want the feature branch, if the feature branch has all of the tests and all of the functionality that you need, the pull request in GitHub can actually look at that original feature branch. But if you have additional validations that you want to have in the pull request, you want to build that as well. But we can see for the demo purposes, I'm building the same type of job. Now that's done. We can see here we've got a failure, so we can go in and we can take a look at why it's failing. So we can see there's two changed states. So it pulled off the baseline, and now instead of telling me I have 254 changes, it's only telling me I have 2 changes. So I can review those changes. And you can see in the original, I had it on the right, and now that component has moved over to the left. It's a really powerful feature. I did not have to write a test. I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was develop my component, push it up to GitHub, allow it to run in a job, and now I've automatically got a test written for it, and now I've got fast feedback in the pull request. So we're going to take a look at the next change. We can see what the previously accepted state and this different view was. So it's the exact same component, but it's a different state. And so now I can see in that different state, it's still generating the move of the button just like I desired. So now I can accept all of those. And now it's converted that to a success. So as a product owner, I can show up, I can go right into the screener UI, I can say all of my components have been tested, I've accepted all of the state changes that I've desired and put into the user stories, and now I can accept those, and this can trigger the subsequent merge, the subsequent build. And you can see here, I'll be able to do the same thing within the pull request, and I can track those via branches. And this is also going to re-pull it into the baseline right before it merges into master. So if I have another person who's committed other state changes, right before it goes to merge into master, it's actually going to re-pull that baseline, do another state comparison, and make sure that everything's kosher, and then I'll be able to accept it based on that. We can see here that the Jenkins file, some of you are probably very familiar with this, but I'll iterate it just in case you don't know. The Jenkins file is actually reporting back to the pull request. So it's giving the status back. And so now we can see that both branches that I've built have been completed, and both builds are passing. So me as the person reviewing, a DevOps engineer, a release engineer, somebody who's managing the trunk, I can come in here and be confident that I can merge this pull request. Since I merged that pull request, another webhook is going to get sent back to Jenkins. And because it's on branch master, we can see that it's kicking off, and now it's going to reset the baseline, let us know that the changes are now in the baseline, and master will be changed. And we can see here in Screener, as soon as it gets to that part in the console, that we're kicking off the master job now. And we can look across all 3 branches and see what different jobs and what different features were pushed for those given branches. So there are other visual testing tools on the market. There's different tools that you can use locally. There's different tools that you can use on the cloud. Why use Sauce Visual? So we use a smart hybrid diff. So a lot of times with a tool, you're doing a pixel-for-pixel comparison from one screenshot to another. And that doesn't cover everything that you need to do. So if you've got a text box at the top that disappears and everything shifts up, a pixel-for-pixel comparison is going to tell you that the entire web page has had a ton of different changes. So you're going to see something like this. In a pure image diff, you're going to see everything is shifted up, and so now it's going to tell you that you've got all these different UI changes, and that's not necessarily true. Your content hasn't changed. Your structure hasn't changed. Your layout hasn't changed. All your elements didn't change. It was just all of those elements just shifting up. And so that structure has stayed the same. And so it should only tell you about one instance of that. And so how do we do that? We grab the DOM snapshot. And so there's a hybrid comparison where we grab the pixel for pixel. We do a comparison with the DOM. We make sure all those changes actually marry up. And then that's when we ship the result to the UI for you. So how do you control that? We have different comparison modes. We can compare structure, we can compare layout, we can compare style, and then we can compare content. So if we have wording that changes, we can compare that. If we have a CSS change that changes, we can do that. We can set debugging details for get root cause analysis. And we can ignore any parts of these if we don't want to test them. So if we want to ignore by a category, like structure, layout, or style, we can do that. If we want to ignore by selector, so maybe we have an ID box or a sign-in box that we don't necessarily want to change or we don't necessarily want to review, it's a component that we know that is good, we can deselect that by using the selector. Or you can go into the screener UI and you can make those changes in the UI. So going through that demo, that short demo, you can see how it fits into a very natural workflow. A lot of times when you're doing something like Selenium or Appium code, you've got a separate repo. You've got a QA organization that's actually collecting requirements downstream. They might not have all of the application understanding or the full stack application of what's going on underneath the UI. And so there's a lot of disconnect there, and it's a very unnatural workflow. I've worked at a couple large companies where I've been part of the centralized pipeline team or the centralized QA team. And there's a lot of non-cohesion going on between those teams because their functions are so separate. So this allows you to fit testing into a much more natural workflow, into a tool that a lot of UI developers are already using. It allows you to create those visually perfect UIs. So if everybody in this room, I'm sure, has bought something online, gone to a new website, and you quickly assess the quality of that website by how it looks. So if it looks really old, it looks like it's not a modern single-page application, and it's not loading quickly, or it's or visually unappeasing, that you're less likely to use that. And so by creating those tests on the fly, I didn't have to create anything while I was doing this demo. I'm able to move faster and ship with confidence. Okay, so that demo went pretty quick, but usually there's a lot of questions around this. So what questions do you guys have, or what would you like to, is there any other things that you'd like to see from that part of the demo? Yes. To get it all put in? Yeah, cool. So when I was talking about bringing master up, and I'll demo that right now. I'm going to delete this project right now. Okay, so if I want to install something, I need to make sure Storybook's installed, that I've written some stories, that everything's in there. That's what I showed you when I first started Storybook and I brought up that UI. When I brought this up. When I initially have those, I'm going to go kick off master. Oh, gotcha. I'm sorry. So you're just mean a new component. Got it. So every time you add a new component, it's just going to find that new component. It's not going to have anything to compare it to. So it's going to be set as a, so actually this workflow is just going to be just like it, except instead of having 254, you're just going to have that 1 or 2 extra components, or maybe 5 or 6 states for those 1 or 2 components. Does that make sense? So yeah, here in the screen, we'll see this. So when this finishes, this is going to tell me you have 254 new UI states. So if I had added just one more UI state and I had already set the baseline to 254, it would say there's 255 UI states, but only 1 has been changed. Make sense? And that'll come up here in a second. I'll be able to show you that. Yeah. So this part of the product is visual component testing only, like so image comparison. But the product within Storybook, so if you use Storybook, see if I can find one that has an input state. So using the integration with the API, if this is a workflow, I can actually input and manually drive through this workflow. And because it's using the API, it'll actually put all those in there. So I didn't set up a demo for that, but that is a part of the product where you can drive through parts of the components that have a workflow to it. Cool. Yeah, yes. No, so it's definitely it's all saved in Screener. So if you delete it, you're going to lose part of that project, which is why it has the confirmation it does, just like a GitHub repo. It makes you type in the whole repo, because it is a serious action that you're about to take. But using Jenkins, you can always go back to a build and find a certain commit ID, and you could rerun that specific commit ID, which is going to have the state that you lost. You can upload that as your new baseline, and then you can start from there. But you are going to lose the history that's in there. Like every single one of them, like the baseline? Yeah, so in here, when I go review, so I can do all. So this particular one, because they're all changed, and this is the baseline, I can accept this. But if I want to see all, I can do all of them, or I can just do the changed. And so I can go through and I can filter those how I want. But on every single run, you're going to be able to see every single UI state that was uploaded to that build. Well, that's how your components are set up in state. So in Storybook, like this is the status dropdown. But here's the two different states. So one state would be checked, and the other state would be unchecked. So you would be able to search for it by name if that had a state. Make sense? What other questions do we have? What do you mean? For example, if I register a user, and then I want to see what happened in the next page. That's the one where so that workflow I was telling you about, where you drive through it, you can see what that next state would be. Right, but then if I'm going to run for another branch, wouldn't that user already exist and refuse to? So yeah, I see what you mean. So that's really how you manage your test data. So the way we recommend, so if you go to like Selenium testing or Appium testing, any real testing, if you're going to have test data set up like that, you should have an API where you're managing that test data, where you're bringing that data up for a test, and then you're tearing it down at the end because you want to use it again. And that's not always feasible. I've been in situations where I need a mobile phone number, and so that mobile phone number does get tied up, but those are complex data situations where you need a more complex solution. Yes? Oh, no, you. Yes. No, because it knows that the baseline is, it pulled off the baseline, so it's comparing to that baseline. And so once you approve it in the pull request, you're approving it against that baseline. It's smart enough to know that. And so it's just going to allow the merge to happen. What I was explaining earlier is that if there's other commits that have happened before you, it's going to pull that baseline down and give you a review of that before it actually pushes. So that if two people manipulated the same component, it's not going to allow that to push to master. Yes? So what do you mean? So like if you have a spinner, or if you have like a well, and the original state's going to always be the same. So let's say it's like a picture, or it's like a gallery generator that's switching views. Like that initial state should stay the same. And if that initial state is different because a third party pushed something, then that's what the tool is there for, is to catch that change, and you can accept it or deny it. Or did I miss that a little bit? Right, and then, so the reason I'm not fully following on that is because you would have that source code. Like if you were going to load it up, like this is loading the image directly from Storybook, from the actual component, and so you would have that component before it would ship, so you would know if there was a change. Did that answer your question? Okay. We got time for a couple more questions. Yes? So this will actually work with any CI tool. So it'll work with Circle CI. You can actually go into the docs. And so you can figure out how to integrate with CI. And basically, that screener config.js is your main configuration file. And then all you need to be able to do is run test Storybook. And so you can see here, Jenkins, Circle CI, Travis CI. We have some integrations that are a little bit deeper or a little bit more interlocked, like Circle CI or Travis. But anything where you can actually run a shell script or you can run a command, we're going to be able to integrate with. I think there was another question over here. Going once. Going twice. Do you have a question? Nope. Cool. I'm going to put my contact information up here. If you guys have any questions, I'll be at the booth over for the Sauce Labs booth. I can answer any questions there. Or if you want to have a conversation with me, I'll be at the back of the room for a few minutes. Thanks for coming to my talk.